Hi there, it's Jeff here. I thought I'd do something slightly different in this video today. I've decided to take the ideas of 10 great economists and think about how we can link it to your economics papers. So hopefully you find this useful, and let's see what we come up with. I'm going to show you here pictures of 10 economists. Maybe press the pause button. How many of them can you recognise? Now, I gave this talk to a school just recently, and there were about 50 economists in the room, and I think we got 4 out of 10, which was pretty impressive, although they weren't always the right answer first time up. So have a go. How many economists of these 10, this lovely picture board, can you identify? Well, let's go from the top row first. John Maynard Keynes, top left, followed by Elinor Ostrom, Joseph Schumpeter, Esther Duflo and William Baumol. That's the top row for you. And did you get any in the bottom row? Mariana Mazzucato, Joan Robinson, David Ricardo, David Card and Arthur Lewis, Sir Arthur Lewis. John Maynard Keynes. Well, I studied economics at Cambridge, and since I'm a Keynesian, and I always have been, and I suppose always will be, Keynes was the founding father really of modern macroeconomics, rejecting the classical view that markets are self-equilibrating and they correct very quickly. So he was a proponent of challenging the conventional wisdom that markets would always basically stabilise. And he proposed that the government should use active counter-cyclical fiscal policy, especially during a recession, go against the direction of the trade cycle. So deficit funding, for example, if the economy is in a slump. He also introduced the idea that an initial increase in spending leads to a greater final increase in national income. So you'll know that as the multiplier effect, or the Keynesian multiplier, although it was actually Richard Mead, I think, who did most of the work on this. But this is a really important idea, that the multiplier effect can be a powerful tool in the army of government macro policy. Keynes criticised the classical view that wages adjust quickly to restore full employment. So he was arguing that real wages are sticky downwards. Workers, for all kinds of good reasons, resist real wage cuts, even during recessions. I wonder what Keynes would have said about the problems of the world economy in 2025. Global politics, geopolitics, at the intersection of trade economics with Trump's tariff wars against a range of trade partners. I think Keynes would have been anguished about the return of protectionism, as he wrote about, of course, in the 1930s, with the general theory that, free trade, the principles of free trade are paramount, and ultimately beggar our neighbour policies bring down growth, cost jobs and drive living standards lower. Elinor Ostrom, the first winner of the first female winner, of the Economics Nobel Prize, scandalously long time before that happened. She died in 2012. She was an economist but also a political scientist. And I like to think of Elinor as one of the great political scientists who understood environmental issues, in particular how best to address common pool resource problems, in particular the tragedy of the commons. It's the idea that people operating in their own self-interest over-extract, overuse common pool resources, and that leads to a permanent depletion in the value of those resources. Ostrom's work in the field, from the fisheries of Maine to the pastures of Italy, found that communities can successfully self-organise to manage common pool resources, such as fisheries and pastures. The other options are state control, nationalisation, or privatisation, but Ostrom said there was another way. And trust, cooperation and communication amongst resource users and owners can, in theory, enable successful self-governance. What you need to nurture are communities with strong social capital that binds people together. That can make a big difference in addressing climate change. Joseph Schumpeter, an Austrian school economist, was the originator of the idea of creative destruction, which describes how progress occurs through constant product and process innovation. Indeed, there are often long waves where this really gathers momentum. And capitalism is driven by the replacement of old industries and firms with new, more dynamically efficient ones. Innovation is an iterative process. Often it's a disruptive process. You're disrupting existing markets, perhaps making older products and businesses and their models obsolete. And this process, creative destruction, is painful for some businesses, but Schumpeter argued led to growth and higher living standards. But it can lead to structural unemployment. So Schumpeter is one of those great economists to think about whenever you write the words dynamic efficiency or use the words innovation and disruption in your economics papers. This is particularly relevant, I think, to market structures. Here are 6 market structures that exam boards quite like to ask questions on. Maybe press the pause button here. I'm going to spin the wheel. The wheel is spinning. I'm going to choose an industry. I want you to think of challenger brands in banking and financial services. So maybe press that pause button. Can you think of a couple of challenger brands, perhaps operating with different models or different products, that are challenging existing established businesses like Barclays and NatWest? What do we think? I've gone for the likes of Monzo, Revolut, Starling Bank and Zopper. There's lots of internet-only banks, app-based services, which are certainly becoming super popular and challenging existing banks. That was fun. Let's try it again. Let's choose the same. It won't be banking this time. What do we think? The power of AI, sportswear, fast fashion, food and drink. We have gone for energy providers. Okay, so again, press that pause button if you're with me. Can you think of 2 new challenger brands in the UK energy market? I've gone for Bulb, although Bulb went bust, and Octopus Energy. Now this is really interesting. Octopus Energy is now the largest supplier of domestic gas in the UK. These figures take us up to Q4 2023, but in fact, this business created by the Jackson brothers, economics graduates from Cambridge, Octopus has now overtaken British Gas to become the largest supplier of gas in the UK. It doesn't produce gas, it supplies gas. It buys gas from the wholesale market and renewable energy from the wholesale market and then retails to customers. Interesting. A disruptive presence in the energy sector. Esther Duflo is a very famous economist, a groundbreaking development economist. And again, she won the Nobel Prize just before the pandemic in 2019, alongside her husband, Abhijit Banerjee, and Michael Kramer, for their work in experimental approaches to tackling extreme poverty. Esther Duflo is a powerful advocate for gender-based interventions, and in particular her work in randomised controlled trials, testing policies in the ground, local levels, within communities. RCTs is a method borrowed from medical research to assess the effectiveness or the efficacy of policies. So things like deworming programs can be powerful in improving student attendance in schools. Perhaps basic income schemes can be a way of addressing extreme poverty. It's well worth reading up on the work of Duflo if you're studying development economics for your A-levels and IB exams. Have a little bit of a note on what she argues, and in particular her argument that you need to test policies on the ground, randomised controlled trials, to improve the value of each dollar spent, for example with aid and other interventions. William Baumol, an outstanding economist with much to contribute to the world of market structures. He was the creator of the theory of contestable markets. He died in 2017. A contestable market theory challenges traditional monopoly models. So in a contestable industry, even a single firm may behave competitively, keeping prices low because of the threat of, as well as the actuality of, challenger firms. So this theory argues that regulation is not always necessary if, big if, markets are easily contestable. But Baumol was not against having large firms. He argued that large businesses operating at scale can play a crucial role because there are benefits from economies of scale. And he made the point that a contestable oligopoly might be best from the point of overall efficiency and social welfare. If we think about an industry like telecoms in the UK, it is an oligopoly. BT, by the way, and EE are now one business. But you can see there in 2023, you have some big players, BT, stroke EE, Sky, Virgin Media and TalkTalk. Now, there is competition and there is scale. So perhaps this is the best market structure for economic welfare and efficiency in the long run. Mariana Mazzucato, is a creator of the idea of the entrepreneurial state. She challenges the view that innovation is driven mainly by private firms and free markets, and that many of the breakthrough technologies, the internet, GPS, etc., were actually initially funded by state investment rather than private capital. Private sector innovation often builds on public or government-funded research. The iPhone, Apple's dominant product, relies on technologies such as GPS, touchscreens and Siri that actually originated from government funding projects. Mazzucato is an expert in the economics of innovation. She argues that companies should be mission-driven, that the company should be incentivized to reinvest profits in R&D, worker training and sustainable practices, rather than the current trend towards massive share buybacks and executive bonuses. She's a big critic of both of those. Just a quick look at Apple. How many of you have got an Apple iPhone? This chart goes all the way back to 2009. Of course, the iPhone was created in 2007, wasn't it? It was launched, sorry. But you can see how quickly it's become Apple's absolute dominant sort of revenue generator. It's come down a little bit since, but approximately 50% of the revenues for Apple come from the iPhone and the ecosystem around it. And of course, Apple is one of the most profitable businesses on the planet. Joan Robinson, a contemporary of Keynes, a deep thinker in all areas of competition and macroeconomics as well. She argued that most markets are imperfectly competitive, and she gave us the theory of monopolistic competition, which you may well be studying for your exams, where firms differentiate their products through branding, advertising and quality differences. She also brought us and gave us the concept of monopsony, a market where a single buyer has control, which is relevant both in labour markets and also product markets. And she challenged the concept of equilibrium, arguing that real-world markets are constantly evolving and rarely reach perfect balance. Now, Robinson died in 1983, and she did not get the Nobel Prize for Economics, but she's one of the great Keynesian thinkers, contemporary of Keynes. She contributed the idea of animal spirits. So if we think about her contribution to economics, monopolistic competition, monopsony, animal spirits, you can see that she was an outstanding thinker in her time. When we think of monopsony, I wonder what your views are on Amazon. Just wanted to show this chart on Amazon's revenue globally. Revenues in billions of US dollars, effectively almost $2 billion a day now of revenue. And of course, the business is now highly, highly profitable. So this is the hockey stick theory that eventually profits take off when you get to such scale and size and dominance. So Amazon is both a monopsony and a monopolist. And this raises interesting questions about welfare and efficiency. David Ricardo is a classical economist renowned for their trade theory. One of his most famous contributions is the idea of comparative advantage, which explains how countries benefit from trade even if one country is more productive in all industries than another. And he also came across the idea of Ricardian equivalence, that government borrowing does not necessarily boost aggregate demand because people might anticipate taxes will increase in the future to pay off debt. So if the government cuts taxes and borrows money, rational individuals will save their extra income rather than spend it, expecting future taxes to go up. But Ricardo is probably best known for his trade theory. Let's play Tradle. Can you identify this country from their export pattern, heavily dependent on exports of textiles to the European Union? What do we think? Well, that country is Bangladesh. Let's try one more. So a much more variegated export system, a lot of manufacturing there, cars, computers, delivery trucks, but heavily dependent on trade to the United States. Which country do you think this is? And the answer is Mexico. David Card is a Nobel-winning economist for his work with the late Alan Kruger on the labour market and in particular minimum wages. Now, classical economics predicts that increasing the minimum wage reduces employment because firms hire fewer workers as the labour costs go up. But Card's research found that minimum wage laws do not necessarily cause extra unemployment, especially if you impose a minimum wage in a market where there is a monopsony employer. Card is also more positive than many economists on the impact of immigration, arguing that immigration has neutral or positive effects on local economies, in particular when it helps to fill skilled labour gaps and drives up productivity. So the minimum wage is going up in the UK, and keep in mind it's going up in April 2025 to £12.21 per hour for adult workers. Now, in theory, this will be an extra cost to business and could cause extra unemployment, but it does depend on the market structures that are in place. And Card's work argued that with a monopsony, imposing a minimum wage can actually help to lift employment. Finally, Sir Arthur Lewis. Last, but by no means least, a Nobel winner for his work in development economics. Lewis created the dual sector model of development, which explains how countries grow by shifting labour from farming to industry. And that shift often involves very, very large scale rural-urban migration. So development is not just about growth of GDP, but about structural transformation, the change in the pattern of output and the pattern of jobs, hopefully shifting scarce resources, labour and capital, from low productivity to high productivity sectors. The famous Lewis turning point, which is actually on the spec for some boards, refers to the moment when surplus labour in the farm sector or the extractive sectors is fully absorbed by the industrial sector, driving wages higher and driving structural change. So think of Lewis's work as really important in terms of those long-run dynamics, especially when discussing rural-urban migration. China's a good example. Here's the slow population growth in China, but the changing balance between urban and rural regions. And as you can see now, the rural population has decreased by over 150 million since 2014. The urban population has increased by upwards of 200 million over that period. So there's been huge continued migration flows, although population growth is clearly slowed down. Per capita incomes in urban areas continue to grow. They've grown in rural areas, but by no means as fast. And this is an important chart to finish with. The gap between urban and rural households in China continues to widen. So there we go. I hope you found this useful. I've just been through 10 economists and just trying to pick out some of their key contributions to economic thinking. Make sure that you know of some of these economists when you're writing your economics exam papers. Thanks for joining in. Stay happy, stay safe, stay curious, and see you sometime soon.